It's George Gruhn here on Friday the 13th of November. Hopefully, Friday the 13th will be a lucky day for most of us, but in spite of the superstitions about the date, there's certainly enough weirdness in the world out there, election, pandemic, and otherwise, and I'm not going to try to get into the middle of politics of any of that for today, other than say it'd be weird out there, but people still want guitars, and that's a good thing. We have plenty of people submitting questions today, so I shall plow into some. Doug Posey has submitted a question, says, I recently came across some information regarding truths and myths associated with the Gibson Supreme line of guitars. A product of that info is a discussion about some 2005 Les Paul gold tops that had been signed by Les Paul and protected by having clear finish placed on it after he had signed it near the bridge. The fact is, yes, they certainly do exist. The Les Paul Supreme models, happen to have one right here. In fact, it is this model with the Les Paul autograph on it. And these were autographed prior to the clear coat on the top. So they were autographed by Les direct on the gold finish before a clear coat was added. So the signature actually is durable, because so many guitars with autographs have the problem where if you play it, the autograph rubs off quickly. The Supreme models feature not only a carved top, maple top, but the back is carved as well. So it has a arch carve to it. They have the inlay on the fingerboard with the split blocks and their own special inlay on the peg head. And this particular group of guitars was a Les Paul 90th anniversary, the 90th anniversary, not of the Les Paul model, but the 90th anniversary, his birthday, for his 90th birthday. There were 90 of these signed. They feature the gold top finish. It's a one-piece mahogany neck, carved maple top, one-piece mahogany body, tune-matic bridge, stop tailpiece, humbucking pickups, 1 11/16 nut width, the Grover Rotomatics with the keystone-shaped buttons, 7-ply white and black edge binding, 90th anniversary inlay at the 12th fret, 90th birthday. And there it is. So yes, they exist, and here is one. So that is a fairly straightforward thing. It's an item that you wouldn't necessarily find in most catalogs or price guides, because it was one issue. 90 of these guitars were made, and as far as how much extra it's worth because of Les Paul's autograph, that may be debatable, since Les Paul signed a heck of a lot of guitars. He would sign damn near any guitar you stuck in front of him and ask for an autograph. But there's very few of those autographs that are under the finish where they're protected like this. So this is unusual in that sense. And there are no other models that I'm aware of that were done as limited editions with his autograph under the clear coat. So if you're a Les Paul fan, as there are plenty of them out there, this would be an interesting model, and certainly something that you're not going to go out and find in quantity, because there were indeed only 90 made. Ron has a question. It says, I have a 1963 ES 230 TD, serial number 105003, that has the Epiphone vibrato system. The bridge is a knockoff of an ABR I would like to replace it as metal saddles and sounds fine. I'd like to put original equipment if sonically it is as good. Research indicates that ABR1 with nylon saddles and retaining wire is what it would have had. How will that affect the sound? First, ES230 doesn't sound like a model I'm familiar with, but I can say that regardless of whether that model is correct, I've never heard of an ES230. But if it is the ABR1 with nylon saddles, which would be typical enough in 1963, they give a different sound than the metal saddles. Brass saddles will give a brighter sound. Metal saddles in general will give a brighter sound and more sustain than you get out of the plastic nylon saddles. And depending on the type of metal you use, also the sound is different. And that's true whether it's Fender guitars, Gibson guitars, or any other. If you have metal bridge saddles, the type of metal and metal versus plastic certainly does make a difference. There's even experiments with Fender type bridges for a Stratocaster or a Tele with titanium saddles, and they give a very bright sound, bright enough that it doesn't sound like a traditional Strat or a Tele. So it does matter very much what the saddle composition is. And that is a matter of personal preference. And since bridge saddles are replaceable, you can try a variety of different bridge saddles without really worrying about whether it's going to hurt the value of your guitar. And for that matter, if you have a Tune-o-matic bridge and you want to try a different model Tune-o-matic, if it fits on the same posts, you've done no damage to your guitar to try out a different bridge. What we advise is not to start drilling holes and radically altering a guitar to do this. But on an interchangeable component, especially something like a bridge saddle or even the entire bridge, if it just fits Tune-o-matic on the same two posts with no modification to the guitar, there's no problem with trying out something different. You can always put the original back on. Just pick the one that suits you sonically the best. I'd like to bring Gary in for a moment. Gary can sit right here and tell you his experience. Here he be.
Hey there, George. How are you?
Good.
So this is one of our 50th. You're familiar with these instruments, right?
Indeed, Singer mahogany.
Mm-hmm.
And the wood on some of these has a lot of flash to it.
So I had a customer call in earlier in the week. He was interested in one of these instruments, and from the photographs, he kind of noticed that there seemed to be a difference in the color between the two sides of the back. And so we looked at several instruments, and because of the grade of this wood, they all had a similar thing going on. So I just thought it would be important, especially on these instruments, with this grade of sinker mahogany, to talk with them a little bit about what's actually going on. This, despite what some may think, is not defective.
Well, if we flip it in the, let's just see what we get in terms of change of color.
Mm-hmm.
You can, if we wiggle the guitar, you can see pretty radical shift of color going on. It can go from light to dark. And you can wiggle it where one side will even look lighter. See there, you can see it looks quite light on both sides. Mm-hmm. Now it looks much darker. And it's almost like some gemstones, its color change depending on the angle of the light. Now you see one side looks darker than the other. On the top, it looks much darker than the other side. But if you flip it,
look at that. Yeah.
Look at that.
Yep.
One side now looks much darker than the other side.
And then
if you flip it this way,
it reverses.
It can go from looking uniform to now it looks quite uniform, but you can see how it goes, dramatic color shift right there. Now,
Yeah.
the wood is actually the same color on both sides,
Mhm.
but what it does, wood has not only the color of the wood, the pigment, but also structural color. For example, a blue jay doesn't have blue pigment in its feathers. That's a structural color. Or the South American morpho butterfly that looks like neon blue has brown pigment, but the structural color is blue. And in most light, what you see is a brilliant neon blue butterfly. You can do some of the same things with various gemstones, like right there. These change color. And if I get a light, this is a phenomenon known as chatoyancy, is the term that the gemologists use. But the same phenomenon, chatoyancy, can be seen in wood as well as stone, and also with fiber optics. So you can duplicate these type effects and you can get light versus dark, and they change color. At any rate, the exact same thing can be seen in the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and in minerals. And it is known as chatoyancy. The sinker mahogany that is used by Martin is sourced from Hearn hardwoods, and they supply wood for major companies like Rolls-Royce for some of their paneling, and for some of the companies that do expensive private jets. But there are a number of species that do this, but I'd like to just read a comment from Rick Hearn from Hearn Hardwoods. In regards to your questions regarding properties of different wood species versus grain runout, certain species of wood, among them, but not limited to spruce, mahogany, and koa, have very desirable natural chatoyancy. This chatoyancy gives them holographic appearances as they are shifted, and can also let them appear to have internal lighting. This is not a defect. On the contrary, it is an enhancement. The degree of chatoyancy is determined by the mineral content in the cell structure of the wood. Grain runout, on the other hand, occurs in quarter sawn lumber when the flat sawn pattern is not perfectly centered on the side of the board, and can change the color appearance when the book matched pair is shifted side to side, but not top to bottom. The piece will appear identical when viewed straight on. Now, what we are seeing on the sinker mahogany is not grain runout. It is chatoyancy. And this is a property seen on some mahogany. It's very prominently seen on Hawaiian koa wood, on some maple, and on some spruce. And when doing patches or repairs on a guitar, if you're doing a splice, if you don't match the chatoyancy, the angle of polarization of the light, you can find that the splice that you just put in, while it may fit perfectly, and while the color of the wood may match, as the light shifts, you'll have angles where it just jumps out as different. And it is important for a repairman to know about that if he's doing any repairs where there's a necessity for splicing a piece, to match not only the color and the grain of the wood, but also to match the natural flash, the chatoyancy, the polarization of the light. And that's something that we are keenly aware of in our repair department. But it's also, again, a feature that makes many of these guitars quite interesting to look at, visually interesting. When you can look at a piece of wood like the one I was just showing you, and you can wiggle it in the light, and it's just endless, beautiful variations of color and flash, where it looks almost like a gemstone it looks almost like it's lit from within. And it's a very interesting feature of wood. But again, it's found in the animal and plant kingdoms as well as in minerals that never were alive. But it's part of nature. Jeffrey, the process of opening up a guitar by aggressive playing has been discussed on this forum several times. What is your opinion of the tone right that is claimed to simulate the effects of actual playing? What about placing a guitar a few inches from a sound system speaker at loud volume for several days? Do you think that would have the same effect as actual playing? It does to some extent mimic the effect of playing, but when it comes right down to it, there's nothing that any of those electronic systems can do that you can't do by active playing. And you can open it up faster by just playing loud. But you can indeed take the tone right, put it on a guitar, leave it there for several days, and it absolutely will mimic the effect of playing. And that is a convenient thing to do, especially if you personally don't play loud. But if you don't mind playing with real vigor a bit, just run that guitar through its paces and see just what its dynamic range really is. There's nothing that the electronics can do, or placing it in front of a speaker, nothing it can do that you can't do yourself by playing it. But the fact is, yes, it will mimic the effect. And it won't hurt the guitar in any way. So absolutely, that does work. Earl asks, is it sonically better to leave my Martin guitar pick guard off after it came off to improve the guitar projection and tone, or should I get a luthier to glue a new pick guard on? Well, the earlier Martin guitars have the guards glued direct onto the wood before the finish is applied. Those guards are highly unlikely to ever fall off. Modern Martins have the guard glued over the finish, and the glue is not nearly as firm an attachment. And this is quite deliberate. The earlier system, while it looks great, can be problematic because over time, most plastics will tend to shrink slightly. And if the plastic guard is firmly glued onto the top and it shrinks, something's got to give. And the plastic can be stronger than spruce. It can pull and cause the top to crack, generally at the edge of the guard. It can be either side, but basically it can crack very typically either right along this line here or right at the edge of the guard here. The guard doesn't crack, the wood cracks. Also, the guard can get cupped in shape. It can be concave because it is pulling and it is deforming the top. That's something that companies like Martin were not aware that the plastic would do. They thought plastic would last forever. They didn't start putting pick guards on Martins typically until 1930. So even in 1960, a 1930 pick guard was only 30 years old. And a lot of times it takes as much as 40 years for it to be a problem. But today, people have been playing long enough that many of these older guards now are problematic. Martin no longer glues them direct to the wood and then sprays finish on the guitar. It sprays right over the guard as well. So again, if the guard came off, it's not going to make much difference in the sound. It's not sonically one of the most important sound generating areas. It's more the area behind the bridge, from the bridge to the end block. The difference of having a pick guard on or off is going to be very subtle. But if you don't scratch the guitar, if it looks just fine and you're not scratching it, you don't need the guard. If you are scratching the guitar, then I suggest having the guard put back on. And it's an extremely simple thing to do. It shouldn't cost you much. If you know how to do it yourself, you can do it. And if you don't know how to do it yourself, then some of the most expensive guitars are the ones that you think are easy. You don't know how to do it, and you try to do it yourself, and undoing it can be very expensive. But if you know how to do it, it's easy. If you don't know how to do it, take it to somebody who does. But is it going to make a dramatic impact on the sound of a Martin guitar to have the guard on or off? The answer is that it will be so subtle that it would be difficult to hear the difference. Gary has a question about nylon string guitars and the relative benefits of tone woods, particularly solid versus laminate. And he says that he knows that on steel string guitars, people do think that it should be a solid wood is preferable. The same is true for nylon. The nylon string classical guitars and flamenco guitars are every bit as sensitive to whether the wood is laminate or solid as any steel string guitar. Nylon string guitars are built very light. They are extremely sensitive instruments, and they most certainly find high-end models are almost all solid wood. Now, there are some builders today, however, experimenting on classical guitars with quite an interesting variety of not only laminates, but composites, including so-called sandwich construction tops, where there's a very thin layer of spruce and then a honeycomb that is synthetic, and then another very thin laminate of wood, so that classical guitar builders are doing a lot of experimentation, different bracing patterns, and even some that have thick backs and sides that are reflectors, and they don't vibrate much, but they reflect. So there are enough different schools of thought that, but those are not cheap student guitars. In general, the student guitars that are basically plywood laminate for backs and sides, those do not sound as good as solid wood. But again, thickness and responsiveness of wood, and especially on the tops, is critical. So if you have a really good quality top, you're going to have laminate sides and back, or especially laminate sides, since the sides don't do much for sound. They are more structural. Laminate sides have been used by makers that are very high-grade makers, such as Ramirez Classicals, and a fair number of those have laminate sides, but solid backs and tops. But again, the general rule of thumb still is solid wood for most makers is what they consider to be the best, with the exception, again, of things like the sandwich tops, which are expensive, interesting, and produce great volume, although their durability over time is something that I question. And so far as doing repair work on one of those, if it gets damaged, we wouldn't know how to repair it. So, so much for that. We have a person named George, a name I can well remember since that's my name. It says, I'm considering purchasing a 1968 Guild Duane Eddy Signature DE 500 guitar. It's a nice blonde color. Can you give me the pros and cons regarding this guitar? Well, It's a very good quality guitar. It's one of the best sounding electric thin line, fully hollow guitars that Guild ever made. It's a rather fancy guitar with a single cutaway. Has the Guild name and the peg head in pearl, a big G logo in pearl, has block inlays with abalone center wedges on the ebony fingerboard. The early ones had de-almond pickups similar to those used on the early Gretsch Chet Atkins models, and then the later Guild DE 500 has Guild humbuckers. But it's, as in my opinion, as good a hollow body guitar electric as Guild ever made. It's a fine guitar, and the DE 500 is a rare model. They did a reissue of the DE 500. It was a very good guitar that was made during the mid 1980s, but the original ones are the ones made in the 60s that are quite fine instruments. And they were indeed endorsed by Duane Eddy. And I don't have anything bad to say about those. They are some of the finest electric guitars that Guild ever made. And I would have no hesitation telling you that that's a good guitar. If it's at all sensibly priced, you're not going to go out and find a bunch of them floating around out there. That's a rare guitar. Gary M. has a question that I am actually going to, he's asking about. He has a Taylor guitar that he would like to possibly sell. And he's interested in an appraisal and seeing if we are interested in it. We don't do appraisals as part of this presentation, but we certainly urge Gary to call us. The shop number, 615-256-2033. And for anyone who wants to get an appraisal, we have an online appraisal service, which is right on the website. Just go to guitars.com and you'll see on the home page, there's an appraisal button. You can click on that. It will guide you through the process, and we can do appraisals from photos. We obviously also do appraisals in person, but when we do appraisals from photos, they are accurate insofar as we can tell from the information provided to us and the photos. You know, if there's a gaping hole in the side and you don't give us a picture of that, we won't know. But if you show what's there, we are good observers, and we can do an excellent job from a set of photos, but there are still some things we cannot tell from a photo. For example, if somebody tightened the truss rod to the point that it's broken and non-functional, we can't tell that from a photo. It's going to look perfect in the pictures. Or if a pickup is dead and needs to be rewound, we can't tell that from the photo. So any appraisal we do from photos will clearly state that it was indeed done from photos, and has that as a limitation. It's not the same as having an appraisal done in person. But we are certainly very much open for business. And if you have a guitar that you want to find out what would we pay for it, how much would we consign it for, what kind of trade-in value you can get, by all means, email or call. Or if you're local, just come in and visit. But my email address is very straightforward, george@guitars.com. If you email to me, I will personally respond. Or if you call the shop number, 615-256-2033, we will do our level best to help you. And if you're interested in doing business, of course, we're here to do business. We are interested in doing it. But this is not something I can do as part of our 1-hour question and answer service. But please do contact us. It's for Gary and for anybody else who has guitars that they are interested in selling, consigning, trading, or just learning about, getting an appraisal. Feel free to call. Kevin has questions on Gibson mandolins. One of the questions he had is, do you know why Gibson used worm under tuning machines for so many years, despite their lack of tuning efficiency compared to the later worm over model? As you know, this worm under design, the string tension pulls the post away from the gear, which creates a space between the two sets of teeth and causes a less snug engagement between the gear teeth. Why did it take them so long to figure out this problem and reverse the gears to worm over design? Well, to answer that question, I need to make a quick dash over to the wall and pull a mandolin off so I can show what he's asking. What we have here is a Gibson A4 mandolin. And as you can see on this instrument, the worm is under the gear wheel. And the string tension on this pulls the wheel. The strings are on it here, and they pull this way. That pulls the shaft forward. That means it's pulling the gear wheel away from the worm gear. And that's the way Gibson and numerous other companies had the gears on their guitars. That's what the gear manufacturers were doing. Now, with why they did that, frankly, I haven't been able to figure out. But I can tell you that starting around 1925, they shifted the arrangement so that the wheel was would be on this side rather than up here. Because this way, as I said, the string tension is pulling the post forward. So that's, the post is attached to that worm, to the gear wheel. It's pulling the wheel slightly up, which is slightly away from the actual worm gear. So there's, have here the gear wheel, and then the worm there. So pulling it away. Again, why they did that, I don't know, but it's not strictly due on mandolins only. You see the same thing on guitars. On Martin guitars, on the slot head Martins, you will see that the same arrangement and the same thing happens around 1925. They go to the more modern system where the gear wheel is pulled toward the worm instead of away from it by string tension. And that does seem to be the more logical thing, but again, logic is not always what companies did in the past, and people learn over time. It wasn't the guitar makers that were making those gears. It was companies like Grover or Waverly and others that made gears. And why those gear makers did it that way, I don't know. And the folks who made the decision to do that, and also the folks who made the decision to change it to the more modern system, have one thing in common: they're dead. And I don't know of anybody who wrote about why they did this. So the folks who would have been easy enough to ask 50 or 60 years ago are no longer around. And the decision, of course, was made more than that, but years ago. But in 1970, when I opened up the store, a 1920 instrument was 50 years old. I've been in business for 50 years. So there were still in 1970 people who probably could have been asked and they would have known the answer to the question as to why did they do it the other way and then why did they switch. But the fact is, I don't know anybody around right now that I can ask the question. And unfortunately, I didn't think of asking anybody about it in 1970. Kevin, the same person who asked that question, says that he has conflicting opinions as to whether truss rods, either adjustable or fixed, affect sound and tone of a mandolin or a guitar. And he also says he's heard it said that stainless steel frets last longer than others, but they make a banjo sound brighter, which may not be desirable for some pickers. And it is true that the fret wire does make a difference on sound. And you can indeed get very hard stainless steel. There's a number of different type fret wires available. And some of these fret wires are actually hard enough that a standard fret file won't work on it because the fret is actually harder than the metal of the fret file. So you end up wanting to use like a diamond coated file to dress frets, but while they are more resistant to fret wear, the fact is some players simply don't like the feel or the sound of the very hard frets. It does change tone, and this is going to be a matter of personal preference, but it also is true that the stainless steel frets, they're more trouble to install, and in general, they cost more, and many of the players don't like the sound as well. Yes, other questions. He says, I think you've already said that the A model Gibson mandolin has the same cubic area as the F model has. I can't remember if you said the extra wood in the scrolls and points have any positive impact on the instrument's volume and tone. I'm comparing oval hole A models and oval hole F models along with F hole A models and some of the F hole models, such as the F5. Obviously, F holes versus oval hole does change sound. And again, not only is that true of the sound hole, but generally they're braced differently. So the models with F holes typically have parallel bracing or sometimes X bracing, whereas the Gibson mandolin models that had an oval sound hole simply had a very small transverse brace, such, for example, on this A4, the only bracing on the underside of the top is a little transverse brace right where my finger is here. And it's quite short. And the rest of the top has no bracing at all. Whereas on the F model, F-hole models, it has bracing, tone bars, bass bar and treble bar, and that produces quite a different response. But the scroll and points on the mandolin, I'll just bring one of those over so we can see it, discuss it. Here we have F holes, scroll and points. Now the F holes certainly are different from the oval hole, and you have parallel bass bar and a treble bar. The scroll is mostly solid. There's a little bit of hollow space in it, but not much. And the points are sealed off and do absolutely nothing for sound. They look nice, and this is sort of a little bit of a leg rest. If you are sitting playing, it's sitting against your leg. It does give you a prop point, but the fact is, so far as sound, if you close that and that, you can see pretty much what you got is the A model shape so far as sound and responsiveness. But comparing to say that a Gibson F5 sounds the same as an A model it has F holes is not really necessarily a valid statement, because the F5 model had a very carefully graduated top, had the fingerboard raised off the top, so that here you see that the fingerboard is raised off the top, and here on the A model, you see that the fingerboard is flush, glued onto the top, so that it is going to be quite different. The F model, just due to the placement of the F holes, and having the bridge right there, means that you have a longer neck. The scale length from here to here is the same as on the A model, but the length of the neck is different and the positioning of the bridge is different. This bridge is close to the middle of the top, and on the overhaul model, the bridge is situated back here. The scale is the same. So the response of the instrument is different. And Kevin also asked, so far as when did Gibson produce its best A models and best F4s? Most people seem to think that the early 1920s, the same time when the Lohr signed F5s were being made, is some of the best of all the Gibson mandolins. But there are some great sounding A's earlier. And but in general, the mandolins that are the most sought after by Gibson are from the early and mid 1920s, but there are still some absolutely lovely mandolins made by Gibson earlier, and there are some marvelous sounding F5s and other Gibson mandolins made into the early 30s. But in general, no later than mid 30s for the ones that are the really prime collectible Gibson mandolins. But Gibson is the company noted by most bluegrass players as being the mandolin to have, and the mandolins, modern ones that are the most sought after today, are the ones that are generally modeled very much after the F5 design. And there are some extremely good new mandolins made today by a variety of builders. So the Gibson type design has influenced mandolin designs that followed. The Gibson mandolin was a very innovative instrument originally, because Gibson was the first company that popularized the idea of a carved top and carved back. The previous mandolins were bowl back and a few that were flat back, but they were not carved tops and backs the way Gibson was. So Gibson mandolins evolved very much over the years. But so far as the other question, also from Kevin, is as far as truss rods, the effect of tone, and he says he's heard that a stain truss rods do affect sound, but it also matters what kind of material they are made out of. There's many different kinds of rods. Martin's early rods that they started in late 34 in their guitars are a tempered steel T-bar. Martin didn't do adjustable rods until 1985, but they went to, in the late 60s, they went to a hollow steel tube rather than the T-bar. So they experimented. And recently they've even come out with some models that have titanium truss rods, which weigh half as much. My own personal opinion is that there really wasn't much need for a truss rod that weighed half as much and does the same thing. Steel rod works, and some people actually prefer to have some mass in the neck. They feel that mass in the neck increases sustain and improves tone. In fact, Aston Pittman even made a device called the Fat Head. It was a brass plate that screwed onto the back of a peg head And he designed them where they would fit various models so that no modification was needed to the instrument. You just unscrew the tuners, put the plate on the back of the peg head, screw the tuners back on with slightly longer screws, and it would hold this plate on the back that added some mass to the peg head. And on at least some instruments, it did improve tone and sustain, but some, but not all. So that's a matter of personal preference, but almost anything you do on an instrument that you alter can change tone. Neck wood, wood type frets, ebony fingerboard versus rosewood fingerboard, composition of the type rod you have in the neck, whether it's a graphite rod or a metal rod, it can change mass, and it does change this tone and the resonant frequency of the neck. And necks, backs, tops, and air chambers do have resonant frequencies. And when you change specifications, you are likely to change tone. And there are so many variables on guitars that it seems that each maker has his own signature sound. Martin sounds like Martin. Gibson sounds like Gibson. Santa Cruz and Collings have models that look very, very much like a Martin, but they seem to sound subtly different. And there are sufficient differences in their manufacturing techniques, the way they do either a dovetail or a bolt-on neck, and just type truss rods. Almost anything you change, type finish, thickness of finish, they all change tone. And we find that there's more than one way to make a good guitar. And our biggest selling new guitars happen to be new Martins, particularly custom shop models that we have been designing. But that's not to say that other makers don't make good guitars too. But almost everything you change can alter tone. Jim has a question: what do I think of the new Martin SC13E made in Mexico? And is that an issue? Will the unusual design be a problem for resale? Well, that's a guitar that has an asymmetrical body, an unusual sculpted cutaway. It is made in Mexico. The quality of workmanship is quite good. And it's offered with a pickup, so it is an electric acoustic cutaway with an extended reach due to the way the cutaway is designed. And as an acoustic electric plugged in, it's a good guitar. Is it my favorite straight acoustic guitar? No. I would rather have a traditional design Martin if I'm playing strictly acoustically. But plugged in, those guitars have been quite successful. And I don't have anything really bad to say about it. It's just, if you want to play bluegrass, it's not the guitar for you. If you want to play jazz or mostly plugged in, it's actually quite a good guitar. And so there's plenty of different guitars which can still be good. Josh Abelson asks, are you familiar with Cole Clark guitars? What do you think of them? What's your opinion of the 3-point pickup structure? How do you think it compares to other pickups? Well, we do have some Cole Clark guitars in stock. They are made in Australia. The people who founded the company used to work with Maton, which is another Australian builder. Tommy Emmanuel plays Matons and is a Maton endorser. The Cole Clarks are designed primarily as acoustic electrics. They look like a straightforward acoustic guitar, but all of their guitars do feature their pickup system. and their pickup system is designed to be very compatible with the disc bracing pattern of the guitar. And they actually have them designed to fight feedback. So their pickup is very straightforward. If you want to know more about it, I would just suggest you go to their website where they certainly explain it. They are well made. They are good sounding plugged in. And by the company's own admission, they are designed primarily to be an acoustic electric guitar. So if you want maximum volume acoustically, that may not be the guitar for you. But if you want something that's acoustically pretty good and electrically very good, they are fine guitars, and they are absolutely stage worthy. We have no problem recommending them for somebody who wants to play plugged in acoustic electric. They're very good at that game. Jerry Black asks if we have any comment on Waterloo guitars. Waterloo guitars are made by Collings. They were designed originally to have some of the aesthetic of the old Kalamazoo guitars made by Gibson as a budget brand, but many of the Kalamazoos structurally were falling apart, whereas Collings wanted to make something that had the feel of an old style blues guitar, but structural integrity of a Collings guitar. And with a truss rod that really works, whereas the Kalamazoos had no rod in the neck. Typical, they were made by Gibson. Gibson brand had truss rods, but their Kalamazoo models did not have an adjustable rod, and they had transverse bracing, which some of the Waterloos are available with X bracing or transverse. But the point is, the quality of workmanship of the Waterloo is vastly superior to the guitars that they were to some extent inspired by. They look like some of the 1930s models that were sort of student model instruments made by Gibson. And they make a few that are also modeled after some of the Oscar Schmidt type guitars. But they are inspired by some old budget brand guitars, but made to much higher standards of quality. And they're good instruments. There really isn't anything that Collings puts out that's not going to be well made. Even, for example, the new Collings cases, the vintage replica cases that look very much like a vintage old Geibenschaefler case, the old Martin cases, but they're actually far better designed. They're stronger, they're lighter weight, they fit like a glove, and they're expensive, but you get what you pay for. They're a very well designed hard shell case that's done in a traditional manner. Some of the best I've ever seen. And in a way, the Waterloo is sort of like, it's a ultra well designed, to some extent, inspired by a cheap guitar, but made with that type of aesthetic and made to have a great funky blues sound, but made with real integrity and quality and durability. Richard Buse says, I ran across and passed on 1936 Kalamazoo KG16 archtop. Is there any demand whatsoever for these guitars? Well, the Kalamazoo brand was made by Gibson. And yes, there is a demand, but in general, the structural integrity of a large percentage of these guitars that we encounter is not very good. The Kalamazoo brand instruments were very inexpensive when new. They were made by Gibson, but a lot of the Kalamazoo models, particularly the flat top models, were priced under $10 new back then, when $10 meant a lot more than $10 does today. After all, back in the days when a Martin D28 in Brazilian rosewood with herringbone trim was $100, the Kalamazoo might be $8 or $9. But still, the Kalamazoo arch tops are in general less sought after than the Kalamazoo flat tops. There were some Kalamazoo brand arch tops that were the higher end that were a bit better, but not as good as, they were not as good as even the least expensive Gibson brand. The Gibson brand arch tops all had adjustable truss rod and were really built to be much more durable in the long run. There were some of the Recording King models made by Gibson for Montgomery Ward that were actually better than the Kalamazoo brand. And some of those, some of the top models of those are worth over $1,000. But in general, the Kalamazoo brand models are going to be worth a few $100s if they're in good playing order, but rarely worth as much as $1,000. And a high percentage of them, to be put in good playing order, are going to be expensive to restore. And it costs every bit as much to restore a student model instrument as to restore a really high quality instrument. In fact, sometimes it costs more because on the high quality instrument, the joints all fit. They were made right in the first place. And on some of the inexpensive student model instruments, the workmanship was cruder and the neck dovetail may not fit so well. The bracing may not be tucked in to the linings and is likely to come out and be much more difficult to clamp and reglue properly. Neck set angles, again, can be problematic. And resetting a neck on some cheap instruments is often more time consuming and does not give as good a result in the long run as working on a high grade instrument. So depends on the condition of Kalamazoo KG16. If it was in great condition, don't know what you passed up on the price, but some of those will still bring hundreds of dollars. And the higher end models, such as Recording Kings, some of those, the absolute top of the line Recording Kings will push $1,500 or more for the M5 model. But most Kalamazoos simply don't bring a lot of money. Scott says, my dad has a Hofner Nightingale special bird's eye maple in very fine condition. I believe he paid about $1,000 for it 25 years ago. I heard Hofner is better known for their basses than the guitars, and probably not high on any collector's list. Is it reasonable to assume that this guitar would hold its original value or perhaps even increase a bit? What is sought after in Hofner in general is their basses, particularly the Beatle bass. Obviously, Paul McCartney played the Hofner Beatle bass, violin-shaped bass, and which wasn't called the Beatle bass when he started playing, because he was playing it before the Beatles were even very famous. But it didn't take long before the Beatles were indeed famous, and when that Hofner model became very sought after. But overall, most of the Hofner guitars haven't really increased dramatically in price in the last 25 years. And sometimes it's also hard for me to figure that, when I started out in 1970, 20 years old was 1950. That could be a Fender Broadcaster. The oldest Stratocaster in the world wasn't yet 20 years old when I opened up my store. But today, 20 years ago, was 2000. And 25 years ago was 1995. And if it was made new 25 years ago, it's probably maybe approaching now what it was worth when it was bought. But so far as in general, only a few of the Hofner guitar models are really highly sought after, whereas the basses are what the company is doing the best with these days. But Hofner is still very actively in business in Germany. They even made upright basses, made a variety, they made quite a few archtop acoustic guitars. And some of those are pretty decent, but in general, most of the German commercially made archtop F-hole guitars, even going back as far as into the 1930s, do not have very high resale value in the USA today. So at this point, we have a variety of other things I could show and chat about, but I'd at least like to address, I think there's a lot of people who may be nervous about the economy, wondering about stability and how's business. And what I would like to say is that business, so far as musicians earning a great living playing gigs, is not so good. But so far as the guitar market, that's a different matter. People still want guitars. And we find that the number of inquiries for good instruments is still very strong. Companies such as Martin, Fender, Gibson, Taylor, others actually are struggling to keep up with demand. Part of that is that they were shut down for a while. Early on in the pandemic, there were lockdowns. Martin was shut down for over 2 months. And even now, they're practicing social spacing. And some of this makes efficiency less than it had been at its peak. They can't pack as many people into the same amount of space. But they are ramping up production, and the demand is clearly there. And we are selling plenty of guitars. There are other shops doing very well. Major mail order companies are doing well, the ones that give good service. So the guitar market is very much alive and well, and is showing amazing resiliency. Gruhn Guitars has shown resiliency above and beyond what I had ever anticipated. I never thought that we'd have to function with our own showroom shut for 2 months and how that would affect us. But the fact is, here we are, and we're actually doing well. Business is healthy. We have a vaccine that appears to be 90% effective that should be available within a few months. So our goal now is let's stay happy and healthy, treat each other according to the golden rule, and we will get to the other side of this. We will have a new president. Hopefully that transition can be made more smoothly than it looks like at this moment. But we all need to work together, and society will go on. The guitar market will certainly go on. There has been very clear evidence this year that in spite of tremendous adversity, people losing jobs, some companies going bankrupt, musicians not being able to tour, people still want guitars, they still listen to music. The music goes on, and this industry goes on. Music and appreciation of instruments transcends generations and is going to be here long after all of us are gone. But in the meantime, we're able to do quite well in the here and now. So here we are on Friday, the 13th. Let's make it a good one. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.